Before the urgent question, I wish to make a short statement about sub judice resolution. I have been advised that there are active legal proceedings in the Court of Appeal in respect of the quashing of convictions of postmasters and postmistresses that relied on evidence of the Post Office Horizon IT system. I am exercising my discretion given to the Chair in respect of the resolution on matters of sub judice to allow the reference to those proceedings as they concern issues of national importance. However, I urge members to exercise caution in what they say and avoid referring in detail to cases that remain before a Court of Appeal. Can I also say I am disappointed that this UQ could have been granted over the last 3 days. I was promised it was going to be a statement. There has been a chance to convert it to a statement. That has been completely failed. Thank goodness that the honourable member stuck with it by putting a UQ in every day. So please, if you're going to give me advice, I expect you to stick to it. I don't think it's good reason. Andrew Bridgen.
Mr Speaker, I'd like to ask the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy if he'll make a statement on compensation arrangements for those sub-postmasters and mistresses who've been impacted by the Post Office Horizon software scandal.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I first of all apologise for the misunderstanding here. I was prepared to do a statement, but obviously current situation and affairs has got in the way. But I'm happy to provide an update on Horizon matters since I last provided a statement in December. I met with the BEIS Select Committee last month, and last week the Select Committee published its interim report into the Post Office and Horizon IT scandal. And the Government will consider the Committee's recommendations and will respond in due course. People need to know about how this scandal came about and what protections there are in place to avoid history repeating itself. And that's why the Government established the Post Office Horizon IT inquiry to investigate exactly what went wrong. The evidence from postmasters who have participated since the inquiry hearings began last week has been really harrowing to hear. And I thank these postmasters for their courage and willingness to revisit the trauma they have experienced. Compensation cannot take away the suffering affected postmasters have experienced, but we're determined that each eligible person gets what's due to them, and that's paid as quickly as possible. Of the 72 postmasters whose convictions have been overturned, over 95% have so far applied for an interim compensation payment of up to £100,000, of which 63 offers have been accepted and paid. The Government is pushing for final settlements for quashed convictions to follow as quickly as possible, and negotiations on the first two have begun. The Government is determined that all unjust convictions are quashed. The Post Office is reaching out to affected postmasters. Post Office is also in discussion with other public prosecuting bodies responsible for the convictions of postmasters, which may have relied on Horizon evidence, to ensure that those postmasters are also contacted and enabled to appeal. Offers have been made to over 40% of applicants, and compensation has been paid to 764 postmasters who have applied to the historical shortfall scheme. 28 postmasters so far are proceeding through a dispute resolution process aimed at achieving acceptable settlements. At least 95% of those cases should have been dealt with by the end of this year. But with compensation for overturned convictions and the historic shortfall scheme both well underway, the group of postmasters on whom my attentions are now focused are those who exposed this whole scandal by taking the Post Office to the High Court. I know that many honourable members support the Select Committee's view that it's unfair that they should have received less compensation than those who were not part of the case. I sympathise with that view too. I can't yet report a resolution of that legally complex issue, but we are doing everything that we can to address it. The compensation which postmasters are due will exceed what the Post Office can afford. The Government is therefore stepping in to meet a good deal of the cost of that compensation. Now, I recognise it's an unwelcome burden on the taxpayer, but the House, and I'm sure taxpayers themselves, will agree that the alternative is unacceptable.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the Minister for his response. As the Minister is aware, I, along with the Right Honourable Member for North Durham, who I'm glad to see is in his place, are the only remaining members of this House who are part of the original Post Office Review Group Working Party set up to address this issue over a decade ago. In the years that have followed, both we and others have been repeatedly dismissed and fobbed off by all of the previous incumbents of his current ministerial position. when we called out what we saw at the time, the evidence we'd uncovered, and what, in retrospect, with so many cases, was a very obviously flawed computer system and a huge miscarriage of justice. The issue was first highlighted to me by my constituent Michael Rudkin in 2011. He'd been forced out of his position as a national representative of the sub-postmasters, and his wife advised to plead guilty to a crime she did not commit because of a flawed computer system, which post office officials were too arrogant to believe could possibly be to blame. A post office management whose relationship with the sub-postmasters I described in this House as feudal back in 2015. My constituents are just two of the hundreds who lost their jobs, their assets and reputations in what is the largest miscarriage of justice in this country in recent history. Lives impacted for 20 years or more. There is no excuse for further delays to compensation. These people were wronged by the Post Office, let down by ministers and officials, who apparently took the word of the Post Office without any question. These people now deserve justice and adequate compensation now, not in months and years, when his department, which is partly culpable for this situation, finally gets its act together. I have written to the Minister, as I've been passed a letter from the BEIS Minister, Lord Callaghan, addressed to Lord Arbuthnot, who was also part of the original Post Office working party and maintains a very strong interest in this issue from the other place. The letter states that no formal request for the funding of sub-postmasters' compensation has been submitted to the Treasury by his department. Could the Minister clarify if this is still correct? Does the Minister agree that all those sub-postmasters who lost out due to the faulty Horizon accounting system should be compensated? I need not remind him that there are many hundreds of sub-postmasters who are due compensation, not just those who've been wrongly convicted, Mr. Speaker, which number at least 736, but also the many hundreds, and I suspect thousands, who made up shortfalls created by the faulty Horizon system out of their own pocket, under threat and coercion from the Post Office, but who were not criminally prosecuted. Could the Minister inform the House if a system has been set up to establish and identify these individuals and put in place a scheme for their compensation? I would warn the Minister and the Government that it's better for us to get on the front foot with this issue rather than let a claims management company take a look at this opportunity, which will undoubtedly result in more litigation, more delay and at a far greater cost to the Government and ultimately the taxpayer. And the Minister will have read the damning BEIS Select Committee interim report by now. It's time we accelerated compensation, got closure for the sub-postmasters and ensure that this can never happen again.
Can I thank my honourable friend for his work both in the campaign for his constituent and for many, many other sub-postmasters that he's outlined across the country, and indeed the right honourable member for North Durham who was mentioned, and James Arbuthnot, Lord Arbuthnot, who I spoke to just earlier on this week. I've indeed spoken to Nick Reed, the Chief Executive of the Post Office and officials about this, because as I was quoted in the newspapers of the Times last week, out of all of my wide range of responsibilities, this is the one area that keeps me awake at night, that absolutely drives me to get resolution. He's asked about the 555 and our commitment. As I said, the 555, they have absolutely been pioneers in this area, and I will absolutely work at speed. I do not want this to go on a moment longer than necessary, which is why we've tried to do everything to short-circuit any bureaucratic processes to be able to get on and compensate everybody fairly. Those 555 GLO postmasters exposed this whole scandal by taking the Post Office to the High Court. They did a massive public service by doing so. I've written to the Select Committee with details of the costs and the preparation that we've made with Treasury, but it's just also when we're talking about the legally complex issue, is just also remembering the timeline of this. And so when we talk about the time scale that we're now working on, it was 1999 that Horizon was installed. It was 2000 that the prosecutions started, 2004 that Alan Bates set up the JFSA, and 2009 that press reports really started looking into the concerns around those prosecutions. And so over that 20-year period with a lot of different ministers involved, a lot of even the post office reorganisations involved, we want to make sure that we can deliver this now, that 20-year scandal, frankly, at pace, to make sure that everybody, including those 555, get the justice, get the answers, and fair compensation.
Minister Simon Malhotra.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I also want to thank the Honourable Member for North West Leicestershire for securing this important urgent question, and to really also pay tribute to my honourable friend, the member for Durham North, for all his work on this issue. The Horizon scandal is perhaps the most devastating miscarriage of justice in British history, damaging the lives of over 700 wrongly convicted sub-postmasters and their families, and so many of those who also have been affected but have not been convicted. I join the Minister in paying tribute to those postmasters who've been relentless in their quest for justice as well. And as the judge-led inquiry into the scandal that has just begun shows, we have also now been hearing extremely moving and devastating testimonies. I would recommend that every member spends their time listening to the accounts to just understand how widespread this injustice has been. Last week's very important Select Committee report shows that 12 years on, we are still painfully far from all the sub-postmasters receiving the compensation they deserve, with 33 of those sadly dying before they have received any recompense. My thoughts and those of the whole House will be with their loved ones. And given the cripplingly slow pace of justice, I want to just press the government on a few issues. Firstly, without the extraordinary efforts of the 555 litigants, how much of what we know would not have come to light. The Minister expressed his sympathy, and as Labour has pushed time and time again, will he now confirm this group will be able to claim the compensation that is due? He has hinted at this, but if so, when? Secondly, a year on from the historic shortfall scheme closing, over 2,500, I understand, have applied. Only 30% of claims have been processed. Can the Minister outline what steps he is taking to hold the Post Office to account to urgently get through this backlog? And could he clarify the definition of eligible that he also stated? And finally, could he provide the House with an update on how long it will be before we get to closure on compensation for all those affected? The Minister is right, we need to learn the lessons and so see that this never happens again and understand the causes. The devastating reality of this scandal will be felt by so many families for years. The government has taken some of the right steps, and we do appreciate that, but justice is not happening quickly enough and it is not going far enough. Thank you.
I thank the Honourable Lady, and Mr Speaker, I sympathise and empathise with everything that she said. I know that for those people, everybody affected, whether they are the 555, whether they're not even prosecuted but lost money, there will be nothing that can be quick enough for them. There will never be anything we can do to restore up to 20 years of hurt and distress. But in terms of the 555, yes, we absolutely want to make sure that those people that broke open the case, that were the pioneers, get full compensation. I'm not able to yet outline a resolution for them, but I'm working at pace both with my department, with our legal representatives, indeed the Post Office legal representatives, and indeed those of the JFSA, and I hope to have news for as soon as is possible. In terms of the historic shortfall scheme, again, that's something that's not moving as fast as anybody would like. What we've done is the Post Office has paid the de minimis cases, the very most straightforward, smaller amounts. The rest of it, actually, what they are doing is working through the early cases, which will then benchmark the kind of value of compensation which for others, which should then allow the Post Office to start rattling through them a lot quicker. They say, the Post Office say, they want it 95% finished by the end of the year. I want to say 100% by the end of the year. So that's the kind of timescale that I'm working on.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister, for the statement, which I welcome, and his tone. Mr. Speaker, my constituent Tracy Felstead is due to give evidence on Friday to the inquiry, and she wants people to be held to account, and so do I. Now, we know that civil servants were non-executive directors on the board of the Post Office. We know civil servants were principal accounting officers for UKGI. And we know civil servants told ministers to come to this place to tell MPs that there was nothing to see here. Those civil servants are not on the list of the core participants giving evidence to Sir Wyn Williams. How can those civil servants be held to account by ministers for their failure to act in this case for so many years?
I thank my honourable friend, and indeed for the work that she does on behalf of Tracy Felstead and others. I mean, Tracy is a case that I often hold up as someone that was so young that she's actually spent more than half her life actually under this absolute shadow and explaining to her children now what happened all those years ago. But in terms of civil service, you know, I set up an independent inquiry to be able to get those answers, and it's right that it remains independent. I don't want to have anybody not feel that they can get away with this, feel that they can not have to answer those questions. And I'll make sure, and I'm sure the Honourable Lady will, my Honourable friend will, make sure that Sir Wyn calls up exactly who he needs to call up as the facts uncover, so that everybody answers without fear or favour.
Evan Jones.
Can I congratulate the Honourable Member for North West Leicestershire for this UQ, and also can I join him in thanking Laura Buthnott for his tenacious efforts over the years. The report, which I've got to say also congratulate the Business Select Committee on this report, is clear. The only reason why this scandal was unearthed was because 555 postmasters took the Post Office to court, including my constituent Tom Brown. They were forced to settle because the government and Post Office used a tsunami of public money to defend the indefensible. Yeah. Minister, we've spoken. He knows that these people need compensation. The report recommends an independent, outside of the Post Office, comprehensive scheme. That is what we need now, Minister. I've got to say, I congratulate him on what he's done actually as Minister in this area. But if the problem is the Treasury, can he not just call it out now, so we can actually put the fire on the Chancellor of the Exchequer to ensure that we get the funding that is needed to actually properly compensate these individuals? And he knows as well as I do, this scandal is not going to go away.
Can I first of all just reiterate my thanks to the Right Honourable Gentleman for the work that he's done for Tom Brown, but also for all of the all of the postmasters. But look, there is no single blockage in the Treasury. What we're trying to do is work through the holistic view about where the money is coming from, clearly, how that's justified to taxpayers, although, as I said at the beginning, taxpayers will clearly want to, when they understand the scale of this and the depth of this, want to make sure that those postmasters can get their review, but also just the unpicking that legal settlement, which, as he rightly describes, was pushed under quite considerable pressure, considerable cost, and considerable might through the Post Office. That will take a few days, but I want it to take days. Frankly, not months, not years, certainly, but days. And I'm working on it as quickly as I can to get that resolution. I'm really hoping that I'll be able to come back to this place, back to this dispatch box, and have some good news for him in the next few days. Thank you.
Sean Bailey.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. My right honourable friend may have just answered my question, but I'm going to press him. I don't doubt the complexities and legalities, and I know the sincerity of the Minister on this issue for the brave group of postmasters who fought and were acquitted at the earlier stages. But my constituent Nicola Arch and her family's lives are on hold. She lost her job. She tells me when the Stroud newspapers covered this story, she was spat at, she lost her home, and she's basically waiting. She thinks she's going to have to litigate again. So I was going to ask for and press him on a timeline, but I think he was just saying days, not weeks or months. Is that the case? For more information, at least, so they can have some comfort that they know information is coming.
Thank my honourable friend, and I believe she's meeting Nicola Arch tomorrow, I think, from my Twitter feed. From Nicola, who I mean, have those exchanges with, and again, my heart goes out to Nicola, because actually being spat at, being stigmatised, really shows that extra suffering that people have. It's not just as tragic it is the convictions. It's not just the money, as difficult as that is. It's what's happened in their communities as former champions of their communities. But look, I'm working at this place. I can't give a time scale, but I say days and weeks. I need to give myself a little bit of leeway, but it certainly won't be a moment longer than is necessary to put these people out of their misery, give them the compensation and justice.
SNP spokesperson Merriam Fellows.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think I'm speaking in a dual role as well as chair of the APPG on post offices, and the Minister and I and the APPG meet regularly. Minister described this as harrowing. It's beyond harrowing, and it's gone on far too long. I want to commend all those members, and I won't name you all, past and present of this place, who have worked tirelessly on this Horizon thing. But what seems to be the nub of the matter at the moment for me is the Treasury really on board with this? For all the money that this is going to require? Is the Treasury really on board for supporting the Post Office network in its continuation? Because they can't, the amount of money that will be required to compensate for this absolute farcical tragedy that people in government and civil service have known about for far too long and refused almost to do anything about it is disgraceful. I take the Minister out of that last piece because I know he's working hard, but it requires more than him to work hard. It requires government in their different silos to come together and completely sort this out.
Minister.
Thank the Honourable Lady for the work that she does in the Post Office in general as chairman of the APPG. But look, she talks about harrowing, and this is why I'm so determined to get this done, because we heard about Tracy Felstead and all those years that she's had. There is nothing I can say at this dispatch box that's going to make her trust me, frankly, because every member of authority, whether it's government, whether it's Post Office, whether it's the judicial system, has let Tracy and all those people down. We need to act. It's actions and outcomes that will matter in this case, which is why I'm so driven to make sure we can resolve this as quickly as possible. But Treasury are not a blockage in this. Clearly, there are conversations we're having with Treasury, not only to make sure that we can underwrite the costs for the Post Office, the additional costs beyond what they can afford that they've outlined in their accounts, but clearly to also give Post Office that future that they need, which we won't be able to get to realistically until we've sorted this past out. But we're continuing to work with them constructively.
David Dennis.
Speaker, can I associate myself with the remarks of my honourable friend for North West Leicester and the member for North Durham in this? They're absolutely right and have been long-term campaigners for it. I had to say, Mr. Speaker, I smiled to myself when you made your statement at the beginning, because, and I understand it and support it, but this minister is a minister who cares passionately about the issue. Yeah. And as a long-term Whitehall hand, what I'm seeing are the symptoms of a minister caught between, whatever he says, caught between the jaws of the Treasury and Whitehall lawyers. Right? And lawyers don't always deliver justice, and the Treasury very rarely does. Right? And so what I'm going to say to him is this: nobody deserves justice more than the 555. They opened up and showed the worst miscarriage of justice in modern government behaviour. And if it helps him in his battle to get this done quickly and properly, I'll say this to him: if he can't do it, we will find a way of having this House instruct the government to do it. And so let him use that in his battle to the Treasury and the lawyers.
Minister.
I can quote the Francis Urquhart line back at him, but look, I think any pressure that everybody makes will be gratefully received. But I think what the last 2 years has done for us in terms of COVID is actually learning to speed government up. The government work from someone that's been running small businesses for 25 years before, used to making decisions, getting on, cracking and doing them. Government doesn't always work that way. We've learnt out the last 2 years how to do that, and I fully expect that to happen in this case as well.
Kim Leadbeater.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As a relatively new member of this place, I'm coming to this quite frankly unbelievable scandal much later than many of my colleagues. But I recently met with a former postmistress in my constituency, Alison Hall, and her husband Richard. They have suffered unbelievable stress and financial hardship as a result of this scandal. And as well as losing their existing business in Hightown, were also forced to abandon plans to open a new post office in Roberttown. So will the Minister agree with me that alongside the dreadful personal trauma that this scandal has been for so many, which must be urgently addressed, it has also had a seriously detrimental impact on communities like mine in Batley and Spen?
Minister.
My heart goes out to Alison and Richard, and absolutely, because the post office offers not just economic value, by having the more branches than banks and building societies put together, but social value, bringing communities together, and at the heart of that are those sub-postmasters. So absolutely, this is why we need to give the future of the post office a real future by sorting out the past.
Ray Robinson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I'm grateful to my honourable friend for securing this urgent question. I know that my honourable friend will also agree with me that the role of the whistleblower has been pivotal in highlighting the issues within the known issues within the Horizon system. This has been a devastating series of events for many people, but for constituents like mine who actually saw their father die in the premises of their shop during all of this, who have not seeing his name cleared, the devastating impact it's had on people has been absolutely tremendous. There is a difference between a settled sum in a civil court and compensation. And people need to be adequately compensated for the traumas and the experiences that they have, not only because that they've now had their names cleared, but they now need to be compensated for what has actually happened to them.
I thank my honourable friend for all of the work that she does about the whistleblowing regime and protecting whistleblowers. And look, as I say, I want to make sure that we can get fair justice and compensation for everybody involved in that. That needs to go through a process. It needs to get that balance right, and that will be done by benchmarking, as I say, people's losses and how people have affected. We have regular conversations, both with postmasters, but importantly with their legal representatives as well, to fully understand the harm done to them, so that we can reflect that in any scheme that we put forward.
Andy MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I thank the honourable member for North Leicester for securing this. And I want to pay tribute to the Minister, because I know that he cares passionately about this. And he's come before our committee and he's expressed himself with great candour. But can I press him on the issue of fair compensation? Because we've heard from many members today, and we'll hear more, that the correct way is not to address this by fair compensation, but full compensation. For all those past losses and expenses, they've paid money back to the post office. They need that money back. They need their future losses recovering, their pension losses recovering, their psychiatric injury and exemplary damages for their loss of liberty. This needs to be reflected in the system. We cannot have a compensation system on the cheap. These people have got to be compensated in full. Will he commit to that?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his kind words at the beginning, and indeed he outlines the complexity of what we need to do and what the Post Office needs to do to right this wrong. That's something that we'll reflect in those conversations with the legal representatives and make sure that we can get the very best without being able to restore those last 20 years to these people who have been affected. We will do everything we can to make sure they get full and fair compensation.
Duncan Baker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As a former postmaster, I think I speak for everybody when this Minister has done more than anybody else in his place to pursue this injustice. Just last night I was told of a community in my constituent North Sheringham which is losing its post office, and I will do everything I can to get it back for that community. It just shows how important it is to everybody to have postmasters and mistresses in their areas. Compensation is one thing. There were over 800 people prosecuted, but we have just less than 80 who have had those overturned. What pressure can my right honourable friend really bring to speed up that process? And when are we going to start talking about Fujitsu and their role in this as well?
So in terms of I thank my honourable friend, and he brings that experience with him of being a sub-postmaster and indeed the social value of the post office in his area. But he's absolutely right. We've asked people to come forward to have their prosecutions overturned. Now, clearly, some of those people do not want to. They've been let down. They don't have trust with the Post Office, with government. But we're trying to work through legal representatives through other organisations to encourage them to do so. We want to make sure that we can get people through this system as quickly as possible. But I'll make sure that I do everything I can with him and with others to get this sorted out.
Mr. Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the Minister really wants to borrow quotes from Francis Urquhart, then I would suggest to him he might want to put a bit of stick about. Because the handling by the Post Office of the historic shortfall scheme has been nothing short of another scandal in itself. I recently took part in what I can only assume was ironically titled to be a good faith meeting, where the Post Office themselves were not actually represented. They only had a lawyer from Herbert Smith Freehills, who I understand are not exactly at the budget end of the market. And at the end of it, they said to us, of course, if you want to take this further, then you should be aware that the offer we have made could be withdrawn. Now, that is the way in which the Post Office is approaching this. It's still the same culture that caused the problem in the first place. My more recent meeting, I have to say, was a bit more promising, but it's clear that anybody who has settled under that HSS is probably not had a just settlement, and it needs to be looked at. It needs to be looked at by the Minister and his department.
Minister. Well, I'll certainly continue to look at it, and I think the point is what we want to do is to encourage this going through things like the alternative dispute resolution, so that we don't have to have a prolonged cases going through the courts yet again, because this, I come right back to the beginning, we want to get this sorted out quickly, but not in haste. We certainly don't want to be getting it wrong so that we're having to start all over again. So I'll certainly look and keep their feet to the fire.
Lee Anderson.
Mr. Speaker, now then, in 2008, Hojinder Bhutoy, who ran a post office in Sutton Ashfield, was jailed for three years and 4 months after he was wrongly convicted of stealing over £200,000. Now, it's took him 14 years to clear his name. He's bankrupt, he can't get a job, it's destroyed his life. Now, compensation is one thing, but when are the people responsible for this going to be brought to justice?
Minister.
I don't know, gentlemen. I've just remembered actually the last point of the my honourable friend for North West Norfolk as well, North Norfolk, who said much the same sort of thing. And actually, look, that is exactly why I set up the inquiry with Sir Wyn Williams to get to the answers for this. I know the Department of Prosecutions have been keeping this in abeyance as well to be able to investigate. But that will come up with the answers, and then whatever those answers are, legal proceedings or whatever will flow from that.
Ian Mans.
Very grateful, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the individuals concerned who've had so much damage done to them not only need compensation, they need damages. They need damages for awards for grievous injustice, for reputational damage, for emotional trauma, for mental health damage, for the stress and for the wrongful contempt from their own communities. The Minister referred of the importance of post offices with their communities earlier. But what the Post Office also did as part of this process was to cynically use this process to permanently close post office branches. So many communities were, first of all, had a postmaster or mistress taken from them in dreadful circumstances, and then had that branch closed as well. So will the Minister review that, please? Because an awful lot of branches were closed in an awful lot of places permanently as a result of this whole scandal. And I think, to reiterate comments from across the House, there needs to be a day of reckoning for those who perpetrated this dreadful injustice on these people.
Minister.
Well, first of all, I want to make sure that everybody comes in front of the inquiry to give that evidence first and feel confident to do so. So I don't want to impose my opinions of who did what at this stage, because it wouldn't otherwise be independent. But then clearly, once those answers are known, then there will be that day of reckoning, I'm sure. In terms of post office closures, we still have the 11,500 criteria there, which we're at and exceeding at the moment, and that alongside the access criteria still stands, and it's incredibly important to restore that to be able to have that social value that I've talked about.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent Rabina Shaheen lost her livelihood, her home, and was convicted wrongfully of stealing £40,000 from a post office and served 12 months in jail in 2000. She's one of the fortunate ones who received some compensation, but it's all gone to the lawyers she had to engage to protect her name. So I back the calls from across the House for a proper compensation scheme to reflect the damage that's been inflicted by a faulty computer programme, and I'd like to endorse the comments made by colleagues. Why has Fujitsu not been held to account for the damage that it's caused to so many people?
Minister. That my honourable friend, and again my heartfelt thoughts go out to Rabina Shaheen and her family. And in terms of the compensation, that's exactly why those who are convicted had the £100,000 interim compensation as well, to make sure that they can actually go a little way towards restoring some of their losses, but also if they've needed legal representation, they had those costs as well paid for. But that's what we are working at pace to try and achieve, that full compensation.
The Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for Chislehurst, and I co-chair the Miscarriages of Justice group. This is the greatest miscarriage of justice that anyone can remember in this country. But could I say that all of us, I think most of us, had a case of like this, the tragic cases. But can I say we worked across parties as members of Parliament doing our job. I found the people that I helped pathetically grateful for MPs of all sorts that stood up in this House, worked on an all-party basis to get this right. It still needs to be delivered fast, this justice and this compensation, and the faster the better. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, I agree with everything the honourable gentleman said, and actually the fact that he was talking about individual MPs doing that amazing work goes right to the heart of the early part of the problem, when all of these sub-postmasters thought it was just them. They didn't realise there were so many, hundreds of people across this country that were suffering the same issue by this faulty bit of software. It's only when they came together, it's only when that pressure built, it's only when we saw the media coverage and people and other champions in this place and elsewhere that we got that bursting open by the 555. Now we need to make sure we can bring it to a proper conclusion.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome what the Minister's been saying today. Previous ministers, to be honest, have failed miserably to grasp this situation, and I welcome the fact that since his appointment we have made rapid progress. I had a couple in my surgery a few weeks ago who, a few months ago, were elated because they thought real progress was being made. When they came a couple of weeks ago, they were deflated. They are an elderly couple. When convictions are quashed, surely compensation can follow pretty quickly. That, a quashed conviction is clear evidence to all that they are innocent and they should get at least an interim payment. What can the Minister do to assist in those circumstances?
Yeah. Well, as I say, we've made good progress in terms of the interim payment, and if his constituents have not received or applied for or received their interim compensation of up to £100,000, please do let me know, and I will certainly look into it, because that's exactly why those payments are there, to be able to have that stepping stone to get to the final sums.
Andrew Gwynn.
I want to pay tribute to the fortitude and strength of character of my constituent Della Ryan, the former sub-postmistress of Duckinfield Post Office in my constituency. Compensation is one important side of the equation, but another is ensuring that natural justice isn't just seen to be done, but is done. I want to refer to the question posed by the Honourable Lady, the member for Telford, because I think it's an important one about the involvement of civil servants in this justice over a long period of time. What assurances can he give to the House that there can be no hiding places for those involved in perpetuating this injustice at all?
I thank the honourable gentleman, and if you can pass on my heartfelt sympathies to Della for what she's been through. But look, this is exactly why we set up the inquiry. My department has said right from the beginning that we will work with the inquiry in its fullest to make sure that we offer all information, all support, all evidence that Sir Win wants. I've got that assurance as well from Fujitsu, as previously mentioned, and the Post Office themselves, and I'm determined that that is actually carried out.
In Holland Ray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I can thank honourable members on either side of the House, and indeed the Minister, for his efforts. In terms of the 555, lives have been ruined, now lives have been lost, people die. The compensation must be delivered quickly. Why can those people not access interim payments? That would be the least we could provide to do something now. I accept his legal challenges around this, but that's something we could do now, and absolutely should do now. In terms of the independence of the scheme, Herbert Smith Freehills acted for the Post Office in the litigation to reduce compensation. How can it be right then that they now act with the Post Office in delivering compensation? It cannot be right, particularly when they oversaw the Lloyds Bank compensation scheme that was judged independently as being unable to deliver fair and reasonable outcomes to the victims. It all had to be done again. If we don't put an independent oversight into this, a High Court judge, it will all have to be done again. We must act now to change the way this is working.
Minister.
That and one friend, and that's actually why we have the Post Office has an independent panel within that does exactly that, oversees the process. So there is a sense of independence with it. But in terms of the interim payments that he describes for the 555, obviously say the interim payments are there for overturned convictions. But that's the legal issues that I'm working through at the moment, because it still was a full and final settlement in the eyes of the law. So that's what I've got to be tapping on really at speed, because I know that those 555 will understandably not understand it and want to crack on now because they want that compensation, and I'm determined to make sure that happens.
Jim Shallam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I concur with other comments of others who thanked the Minister in particular for his genuine interest and commitment to this? We all recognise that, and I just want to put that on record if I can. The committee's report on this is difficult reading for those who took their case and are worse off than those who didn't. I have affected members of my constituency of Strangford here asking, where is the equality for all that was promised? Their reputations are shattered, they are financially bereft, and will the Minister direct his team to right this wrong as quickly as possible? Thank you.
Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his kind words and for his ongoing interest, and it's good to see as well Sir Wynne, as this first weeks of evidence in his inquiry finishes, he is travelling around the country. He's going to go to Cardiff, and indeed he's going to Belfast as well, because it's really important that he hears from people close to where they live, so that they can feel comfortable and confident in giving that evidence. But he's absolutely right that we do want to make sure that we can crack on with this and get that equality that he seeks.
Scott Bent.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sadly, some of those who have suffered so much are no longer alive to see justice served. Will the Minister do everything within his power to ensure that the full inquiry reports back as soon as possible, so that those accountable can finally be held to justice?
I thank my honourable friend. And yes, I can. Absolutely I can, because people have died because it's taken so long. Other people have died because they've committed suicide. It has been absolutely horrendous, and that's why we are determined to make sure that we can get this sorted out as soon as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I was first elected, I was contacted by a constituent whose father had been wrongly caught up in this scandal. He lost everything, his livelihood, and more importantly to him, his reputation. He sadly passed away before he had the opportunity to clear his name, and he will never see the benefits of this compensation. Does the Government have plans to offer personal individual apologies to the family members of postmasters no longer with us?
Well, I can't say give a particular commitment. What I can say is that the Prime Minister is personally exercised by this as well, which is why we met some postmasters last summer, and I know he continues to. I was talking to him just yesterday about the matter. He's personally involved. He gives me the kick that I need to give other people a kick to make sure that we can get everybody the apology, the compensation, and the justice.
That's the end of the statement. The UQ, actually. It should have been a statement.